Hey everybody, today is Monday, February 26th, 2024. Coming up on the show today, from Argylle, editor Lee Smith.
You know, that's the prerogative of an editor. We, as editors, cannot agree with everything that happens in a movie, but this is why we have editors, why we have directors, why we have producers, and why we have audiences.
And editor Tom Harrison Reed.
We had Henry and Sam basically just doing a setup each. Literally, when you're even just watching dailies, you're going, okay, Henry did that brilliantly, I'd want to use him for that. I sounded something really funny there. So just watching the dailies, it was telling you how to put it together.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Hey, what's up? How are you? Thanks for coming. I do hope you're up for some editing talk. You are? Good. That means you're in the right place. Because that's what we're going to do today with a couple of really cool editors. One has been on the show before, and that's Lee Smith. Lee was on to talk about his work on 1917, one of a few films Lee has done with director Sam Mendes. And you probably also know that Lee has done several films with director Christopher Nolan. Also on the show today, for the first time, is editor Tom Harrison Reed. Tom's been editing on features for about 6 years now, at least according to my shoddy research. But prior to that, as an assistant, well, you are just going to have to listen to the podcast to hear the roster of editors he's worked with over the course of his career. It's pretty impressive. The film that has given us the excuse to catch up with Lee and Tom is Matthew Vaughn's Argylle. And for those that would like to know, the plot of Argylle is this. Reclusive author Ellie Conway writes best-selling espionage novels about a secret agent named Argylle who's on a mission to unravel a global spy syndicate. However, when the plots of her books start to mirror the covert actions of a real-life spy organization, the line between fiction and reality begins to blur. So that would be the plot of the film. But the fact that it's a Matthew Vaughn film should actually tell you even more in terms of the style and tone you can expect. You know, lots of action with a wink and a smirk. The question is it going to be like Vaughn's Kingsman franchise, or is it going to be something a little different? Well, that is why we have Lee and Tom here to help us sort that out. So we are going to talk to them in a few minutes. But before we do, I got a couple things to share with you. First is some important info on a great way for you to get great music for your next movie or TV type show. The headline here is that you got to go see Extreme Music, the sonic wizards who helped to sponsor The Rough Cut. Since 1997, they've been the ones film and TV makers have turned to for the very best in production audio. What makes it the best? Well, that all starts with the talent. The biggest names in the world of composing and producing have lent those talents to Extreme Music's enormous catalog of tracks. Their powerful search engine makes it simple to find what you're looking for using keywords like tempo, genre, composer, even lyrics. They'll give you back tracks in which you can customize the instrumentation and even choose from different track links. And for a real magic trick, you can upload a track to Extreme Music for reference, and they will find you ones like it. You can do all of that, including the licensing right there on the web, or you can choose to talk over the licensing with a real nice representative at an office near you. So the next time you have a story to tell, make it sound its best with production audio from Extreme Music. Hey, here's another solid bit of advice for you. Every now and then, people ask me to clarify some of the things that get mentioned on the podcast. Generally, it's something I got wrong, but sometimes it's a term they're not familiar with, or a reference that the guest floated out there that they've never heard before. Well, did you know that many of these episodes of the podcast get reborn on the frame.io blog, where they are transcribed and brought to life with images, videos, and links to other multimedia assets that can really help flesh out the ideas we talk about here on the podcast? You can even listen to the podcast over on the blog and follow along with those assets in real time. So check out blog.frame.io/theroughcut and see what I mean. As an added bonus, to help you find this bountiful blog, there is a link in the show notes that will take you on your way. And with that bit of housekeeping done, it is time to catch up with today's featured attraction. From Matthew Vaughn's Argylle, here are editors Lee Smith and Tom Harrison Reed. Stick to talking about movies then.
Excellent.
I gotta admit, I kind of figured it would be the other way as well, but here we are. You know, I figured we should start off talking about Argylle by talking about another movie, and that's X-Men First Class. Prior to Argylle, Lee, I think that was the last film you cut for Matthew Vaughn alongside editor Eddie Hamilton. Tell me about meeting Matthew Vaughn back then and how that might have led to you cutting Argylle.
Well, we had a very good experience on X-Men First Class, and that was indeed my first outing with Matthew. It was a lot of fun. It was a really enjoyable film, kind of frantic and chaotic in every possible sense. So I just thought when he rang again, I thought, chaos, why not? Let's do that again. Let's revisit the chaos.
And for you, Tom, even though I don't believe you have cut for Matthew Vaughn before, you have an indirect connection to X-Men First Class as well. That other editor I mentioned, that Eddie Hamilton kid, you assisted him on Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, and that could be one option for how you got connected to Argylle, or it could be another Rogue film you assisted on, Rogue One, a Star Wars story. So was it option 1 or 2 or both or neither?
You should be a detective. It was Exhibit A. You were correct the first time. It was through Eddie. Eddie and I have remained friends for a long time. He's kind of a mentor of mine. So he called me up to tell me about the Argylle opportunity and the opportunity to work with Lee. So I grabbed that with both hands. I was very happy to talk to Lee and find he was an absolute gent and a really fun person to talk to and get on with. So we went from there.
For those that haven't seen the film, Matthew Vaughn calls it an ode to 80s action thrillers like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon. When you're meeting with Matthew talking about this film, does he give you reference films for you to go look at in developing the style and the sensibilities of Argylle?
Well, funnily enough, it wasn't the 80s action movies at all that the touchstone that Matthew discussed with Lee and I. It was Charade was the first thing we spoke about. That kind of light touch, kind of the narrative twists and turns, but the whole thing is carried at this kind of slight raised eyebrow and wink at the audience, a light touch kind of romp rather than anything too serious or too muscular. It wasn't supposed to evoke action, but more like a romantic comedy.
Yeah, it's Romancing the Stone is the film Matthew talked to me about. So it was kind of wanting a film that his kids could watch that was something like just a warmth and energy to the romantic sort of side of being a spy, but still taking you on a rip-roaring adventure. So that was, the touch point. As Tom was saying, Charade, I think he was going for a bit more of an old school sort of style of filmmaking, but obviously the end result is there's a lot of unique action embedded in these crazy plot twists and turns. But I think at the heart of the film is you were just looking for warmth between those central characters.
Lee, over the course of your career, I'm sure that many a script has passed before your eyes. For this one, anything about it that stood out to you as something that might be unique or challenging, or any notes that you might have had from Matthew about it?
I think probably the most challenging thing was it was, even as a read, complex in the amount of dialogue and exposition, which, I always imagine would sort of be whittled away over time. But, the script itself was an enjoyable read in the framework of what Matthew was describing. So it all comes down to the chemistry of the actors as to whether you can pull that off. And I think Sam Rockwell and Bryce did indeed meet that criteria.
Matthew always said it was originally, when he first received the script, it was played a lot straighter than it is in the final movie. And I think the original idea was to cast a much more square-jawed leading man and a more traditionally kind of Hollywood glamorous leading lady. And he switched that around. He added lots of other elements to it, more idiosyncratic things. He introduced the cat. He introduced lots of little character beats that weren't in there, which kind of are the thing that make the movie interesting and make it unique. When Romancing the Stone is mentioned, I think it's mentioned as a starting off point. So you think you're watching Romancing the Stone. By the time you get 15 minutes into the film, you think, oh, it's Romancing the Stone. And then he adds all of his other special sauce onto it. So you start off thinking it's one thing, as you know when you've seen it, and then you think it's another thing. And then the thing that you could sort of sell the movie on is it's like a spy version of Romancing the Stone without ruining any of the other twists and where the story goes. That's the kind of base for it. So I think when he's been quoted as saying Romancing the Stone, I think that's just where he wants you to go in and then take you off in exciting other places.
Going into the film's release, there's all kinds of speculation about who wrote the Argylle book the film was supposed to be based upon. There were rumors about Taylor Swift being the author, and then it turned out Matthew Vaughn enlisted the help of an author friend to create the book so that he could then have a movie that pretended to be based on a book. At least I think I have all that right. Whole thing gives me brain freeze. Then on top of that, Argylle would seem to be the start of a franchise, if not a tie-in to Vaughn's Kingsman franchise. I say all that, first to give credit to Matthew Vaughn for actually coming up with some new IP in a world where all we seem to be doing is rebooting other things. But for you guys, to be the best editor you can be on a film, do you need to know about that world beyond the script, whether it's reading the pretend book the film is based on or getting info about where this film might fit into a bigger picture Matthew Vaughn has in his head?
From my point of view, no. I'd rather not know. I've got caught up in world building on other studio films, and I actually find it kind of frustrating because you start making changes based upon a film that hasn't been made yet or generated yet. The best you can do is with the materials that you have presented with you, rather than cunningly trying to craft it for the theoretical next film. There'll never be another next film unless you make a good first film. So to me, I think that's what takes all of my focus.
Yeah. We weren't really aware that there was going to be a sequel or a prequel until quite far into the process, definitely after we'd done the first assembly. So this film stands alone, and I think Matthew just likes to tease where the other things can go. So I think there's only one thing in the whole film that got changed in relation to one of the potential spin-offs, which was just one ADR line. So I think it's just this is the movie. It's self-contained without having to worry about all the other stuff.
Yeah, and just as an interesting point, this film I took through to literally the first cut and then handed it off to Tom because I was already booked on another film when the film commenced. So, and then eventually Tom had to come and go as the protracted post period rolled on, which is again just editorially I haven't really been involved in anything like that before. It was kind of unusual. So when I basically left the film, it was a single entity. I'm sure Matthew, I wouldn't have been surprised if Matthew wasn't angling, as with a lot of people, to make a series out of it. In fact, I'm pretty sure he mentioned the idea that it could go on into another world later, which would be something he'd be interested in. But I think for my time on the film, it wasn't really a pressing point.
Whether you're working together or working separately, I've heard tales of editors working for Matthew Vaughn actually getting to cut at his house with his lovely wife, Claudia Schiffer, making them lunch. That sounds like a pretty good day at the office. Where did you each edit when you were doing your work?
We were in COVID when it was being shot. I was editing from Santa Barbara. Tom was working in London with the crew, and my long-term assistant, Pierce Roma, was in Montana, and the rest of the editorial crew were based in London. And I think Tom will speak to this, but Tom was based in London, but did spend time going backwards and forwards to the set. So, we were a worldwide crew.
I spent every day in a trailer in the unit base, wherever the unit was. And my assistants were all in a kind of office building, wasn't even in a studio, just in a kind of production office building. And he was in LA and Piers was in Montana. So we literally couldn't have been more spread out. And we made good use of the Salon Sync Box technology, which kept us all kind of able to work together. But even for me, I wasn't online in my trailer most of the time because I was on a unit base. So I had to get the dailies downloaded and scrambled to set, and then get drives sent over to me to update me when the guys had finished syncing things up. It was quite chaotic. And I was kind of on call on set for when Matthew needed something and needed to reference something or talk about something, trying to assemble what was from the day before. And then at the end of my day, Lee had got all of the footage and had woken up, and I would have a handover with him and tell him all the stuff that had happened on set that day and all the stuff with the assembly. And then he did his own cut completely independently of mine. So I was firefighting a lot during the shoot, which hopefully left Lee a bit of clear room to get on with his assembly. And we ended up with 2 assemblies, really. Each scene was cut by both of us. And it was just quite an interesting dynamic to have on a movie like this. So it luckily was very, very harmonious, and we just helped each other out.
Well, did Claudia at least bring you a sandwich?
To finish that point about where we did it, I have been at his house several times. I even actually had to go over to Greece when his family were on holiday there to carry on editing a bit when they went on holiday. Matthew has avids everywhere where he goes, basically.
God love him.
So he can carry on working. He's a bit of a workaholic.
For both of you, do you have a preference? Do you feel like it's better for you to be closer to the action, aware of things that are going on in production, having that immediacy with the director, or do you feel like it's better for you to be removed from what goes on before the footage gets into your Avid?
I think having Tom there was essential, and that's the only way that could work, because it did free me to concentrate on the footage that was to hand. With Matthew, the way that they make films, you really do need, and Eddie fulfilled that task on X-Men First Class, being more available to sort of travel and whiz around and deal with, as Tom put it, whatever the fire was at the day. And I had the, luxury and joy of being just ensconced basically here, concentrating on what I was doing. Every other day, Matthew and I would talk on the phone and we'd be uploading cuts back to Matthew and Tom would be updated. And it was a very, considering, I don't want to keep using the word chaos, but it was let's call it an active shoot. I don't think it could have gone smoother editorially with that combination of people. I don't think it would have worked out very well if Matthew had no one on the ground with him. I can't see how that would work. It would work, and I have done it with other directors, but in that scenario, I think you absolutely had to have someone there.
There was also obviously the producers, the second unit director, all of those people always hovering around, needing information, needing to reference stuff, needing to play with stuff and work things out on the day. And that was kind of, there was a lot of people disturbing me in my trailer all day long to try and keep that all rolling along as well. So it was super helpful because Lee wakes up early, we would talk about things, I'd tell him what was going on that day, we'd all make sure we're on the same page. But I think we kept everybody happy all the way through. And at the end of it all, Matthew actually said the first cut that he watched, he didn't really even hardly have any notes at all. He was gobsmacked. He was like, I'm so happy with it. I haven't really even got any notes yet. I'm going to have to go away and think about it for a bit, which was kind of unprecedented, I think, at the time.
Every review should go like that. Okay, well, let's compare the editorial setups that you each had. Tom, you're jammed into a trailer on location. What do you have to have there in the room with you, and how do you like to have it set up? And then we'll ask Lee about his.
We had a full system in the trailer. We were running 2018 Media Composer, but I had my 2 computer screens, my client monitor, and a big OLED. And just for ease, both Lee and I both prefer just to work in stereo, particularly because I was having to kind of pack down and rebuild my Avid like every 2 days, every time the unit moved, every time just my trailer had to be moved. So it was quite a simple, straightforward Avid setup, but it was a full Avid. And then I also had to set an Avid up at home. So when we came back at the end of the shoot day, Matthew would often have ideas and want to start looking at things and start talking to Lee. And so I would come back and I had to just move my sync box over and plug that into my home Avid, which I still have my own equipment, but I had to buy like a new I/O box to kind of make it all work properly and then be on Evercast, which we used a lot as well on this film. So we didn't have a particularly like flash setup, but it was just a full Avid system in a trailer, in a bedroom, in wherever we were.
How about you, Lee?
Pierce organised the whole Avid setup, which I guess was just mirroring Tom's. We had a Salon sync box, which has proved to be invaluable. And I have just had a couple of big monitors, and then I've got a long HDMI cable that I run to a 65-inch monitor in another room where occasionally I'd wander off so I could get away from my desk, which I always find kind of handy because if you're sitting in front of your Avid, my fingers always hit the space bar because, I'm always going, oh, I could do, yeah, oh. But when you're in another room with no control, it's actually kind of interesting. You watch scenes play as an audience, and that was kind of fun. And Pierce was doing a lot of sound work and tidying up, and, we were putting in a lot of music. And Matthew likes to see as complete a version of each scene as you can possibly see. And I'm used to working that way as well. Again, not with every director, but I'm happy to do it. And yeah, Matthew was generally always thrilled because the shoot was very, very difficult. And a couple of times he rang me and he said, I can't believe that scene, it works. I go, oh, high praise, Obi-Wan. Because I think sometimes they get lost in the coverage, and not lost in the coverage, but, it had a lot of visual effects, heavy sequences. And even though a huge amount of the film we could make look really, really good, like there's sequences like Tom did a lot of work on the oil skating sequence that took a very long time to sort of shape, mainly because of just, it was such a heavy visual effects intensive scene. There was just a lot of waiting around. I mean, I was off the film before we literally saw what that thing really was ever going to look like. I think I got a glimpse of it, maybe, Tom, one shot, which was promising. But same with the smoke fight. We were cutting a smoke fight with no smoke, and that was also very difficult. But, it was fascinating. I think I went off and did Empire of Light in England and came back and saw Tom for about 10 days. And I did see a couple of shots from that smoke fight that you finally could sort of go, wow, that looks cool. I think that's going to work. But, they were very long in the gestating period. All of the visual effects on this film took forever, as Tom will attest. Because I think Tom went off and did something else for quite some time.
Well, I finished back in May 23 at the end of our final mix, but one of our vendors hadn't delivered the visual effects yet, and it was supposed to be 4 or 5 more weeks, but that carried on for 5 more months rather than 5 more weeks. But we just had a bit of trouble with a particular vendor. But the way that Matthew works is that once we got the cut of all of these VFX heavy sequences down, he said, turn it all over, and I want to see this whole sequence kind of looking like something before I go in and start cutting it down, which he was fully aware is not the most economical way of doing it. But he said, this is what I would want it to be. This is probably the longest version of it, but I won't be able to tell if it's too much until I've seen something visual a little bit more finished. But unfortunately, that took a very long time to get to that point before we started cutting anything down.
I think you mentioned that you had 2 assemblies in a sense, and there is a lot of intercutting going on in the movie, coincidentally, at least in the beginning, where you're going back and forth between the character of Argylle and the character of Aiden, played by Sam Rockwell, who Bryce Dallas Howard's character, Ellie, she's sort of watching action take place and substituting the 2 characters in her mind back and forth. So you basically have these 2 scenes playing out together where you're cutting between 2 different characters. And I would just like to know about that aspect of how you organized and approached doing that edit where you're almost jumping scenes and match cutting between scenes within an action sequence.
The good thing with that particular scene was it was infinitely cuttable as they were shooting it. There was some second unit that was shot later, but what was really nice is the majority of that is in camera. So that was really just a whole ton of material that could be cut. And the option of cutting it was, which character did you want for each particular moment? Some of it is very specific, but some of it, could have gone either way a little bit. And I think that was one of the most fun sequences, again, from a visual standpoint, because very early on it worked. And that was a great sort of boon. Whereas, as Tom was saying with what Matthew was talking about, for example, the mini Moog scene at the beginning really had very little in the way of visual reference to get an understanding of what was happening. There was some second unit in camera stuff, but a lot of it was just based upon a CG generated previs that went through a lot of manipulation to arrive at the final product. And really the first time I ever saw that was a few nights ago when I watched the film, because I can understand what Matthew's talking about. Difficult to work on these complex sequences when there's so much has to be done to them before you can really get an understanding of what's going on. I mean, it's kind of in Tom and my head as we're cutting, but visually it's very difficult. Probably the most difficult film I've ever seen at that point as far as understanding what's going on.
And the train sequence that you were talking about, that is actually a sequence in the film that barely changed from Lee's first cut.
Yeah.
The action of that. So that's pretty much 95% from the first cut to the end. And then all the VFX coming in and everything, the cut didn't really change. Just kind of the bookends of it and a few little tiny bits here and there, but the music, everything kind of stuck all the way through. So that was, as Lee said, that kind of was the touchstone. There's like, this is the tone we want for the movie, the amount of comedy that's in the action, the visual inventiveness, and just it had the heartbeat of what we wanted the rest of the movie to be like. So Matthew was like, we're not touching a frame of that sequence through all the time we were in post. He never went back and said we should change that.
Yeah.
So it was kind of, when you, in certain points of a movie where you sort of want everyone to see something and feel confident, he would come by to my trailer and say, play the train sequence to whoever was with him, other actors or people who were visiting the set. So he was very pleased with that one.
Yeah, I think tonally Tom's right. That was the one with the temp music that ended up being the music that was used. The whole vibe of that scene was, I think, what the film was trying to get to. And that was very exciting to sort of see because, you know, I wouldn't say it was not a complicated scene to cut, but I just love it when I have all the material in front of me and then you can cut it. And it's just gratifying. And I've done some work on some other films that had CG characters in them, and I really find it debilitating because you're just cutting guys in green suits and, you know, or they're not there or whatever. And I don't know, it's I'm just not that patient a person, and I think I'm sure Tom's more patient than I am. It's like I just want everything to look great from the get-go, and I guess that is coming from a career that was pre-visual effects where, you know, everything just had to look good from the get-go. There was no going back and tarting things up. You just had your movie as you were working.
The great thing about how they shot that scene was that we had Henry and Sam basically just doing a setup each. So they did the fight choreography, Sam did it, and then Henry stepped in and did the same thing. So literally, when you're even just watching dailies, you're going, okay, Henry did that brilliantly. I'd want to use him for that. I sounded something really funny there. So just on the organic way of just watching the dailies, it was kind of telling you how to put it together.
Yeah.
So you didn't even have to wait till like the next day or anything like that. And then they went on to second unit as well. They had the main actors. And it was also the first big sequence that we shot, and they were on it for lots of days. So it got us in the rhythm and got us all in a good spot. And it was great because each day you had something that you could cut that looked like something. And you go, okay, I've done something really, really good today.
Yeah.
The way you build those scenes, do you start with what is specific? This is where the match point is, and then I'm going to build out around that in both directions? Or is it truly a linear thing where you would build it like a more narrative-driven sequence?
Well, they both stepped in and basically a lot of times covered the same action. So we had, you know, the reverses that were shot with the correct actors, and then we had a complete pass with the stunt guys, which, again, I don't, and Tom, you can speak to this, the stunt guys were so good in that sequence and they shot it really, really well that I don't know whether there was any CG, you know, rectification. That was the most times I think I've ever used stunt guys in a film where we literally weren't hamstrung by being forced to cut incorrectly. And there were some organic moments in it where Henry did something that wasn't really scheduled. The guy leaps out from one of the side chairs and sort of just hits him. He doesn't budge and he throws him off, which wasn't exactly what Sam Rockwell did. He just gets knocked over. And that changed. If you rewatch the scene, that's not how we were doing it. We were matching the whole way. And then all of a sudden we had two moments that didn't match at all. But there was comedy in it. There was the humor of Henry Cavill's gigantic sort of Superman-style stance. And Sam Rockwell, being a much smaller guy, just gets bowled over. It actually steps out of the mechanism, but rules are supposed to be broken, and we got away with it. So fun wins every time in that scene.
Yeah. I think that you could say that for the whole movie.
Yeah.
Matthew's idea for this film, he constantly said, I just want this to be a fun ride. He wanted to make a film that was PG-13 for his own reasons, because all of his other films, his kids couldn't really watch many of them, and he set it as a challenge for himself. But he wanted to kind of raise an eyebrow and wink at the audience at the beginning and make this into a fun ride that you'll come out grinning from. So that was always where he kind of went back, and as Lee said, if it was more fun, he would pick that lane all the way through it.
Yeah, one of my script notes was I was very unsure about the head stomping sequence, having been told he wants his kids to watch it, and Vaughn kept laughing at me. I said, I don't know, Matthew, crushing someone to death with your foot doesn't sound like PG-13. But anyway.
That's a perfect segue to what I did want to talk about next, is the tone. In the film itself, actually, Ellie is a spy novelist, and she's on a call with her mother, and her mother tells her that she's struggling with the tone in the final chapter of book 5, this next book she's working on, which I thought it was funny to hear her talking in the movie about struggling with tone.
Yeah.
Just hearing you guys talk about what Matthew wanted to do, how playful he wanted it to be, something he could share with his kids, yet at the same time you're stomping on somebody's head, trying to find the tone of this film. And is it even more challenging when it passes from one editor to another, and then back again, as opposed to working together, co-editing on the film?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've all got our own standpoints, I think. Matthew, even when I was working on X-Men First Class, he used to look at me. There was a moment in X-Men First Class where I think one of the characters' zip was being lowered down her blouse and exposing her chest, and the camera kept going down and down and down, and I kept cutting away. And Matthew was killing himself laughing. He goes, yeah, we can see what you're thinking. And I'm going, dude, I'm just thinking PG-13. It's like, if you want to make an R movie, make an R movie. If you want to make a PG-13 movie, make a PG-13 movie, or whatever. We all have a different bar as to what we think's appropriate. And I'm sure amongst editors, we all have a different bar. I think Tom's pretty similar to me. But, the film gestated for a long time in post, and other decisions get made, and, that's what happens.
I would say that Matthew's very aware of all of these things. He's aware that, he has a reputation for putting things into his films that wouldn't normally make it through in a studio movie with as many big actors in it, because he self-finances and he's not told what to do by studios as much. So there's things in his other movies that you might think, whoa, that's gone a bit far. And it's mischievous and it's on purpose. And in this film, although we didn't want to be R-rated, we still wanted to have a little bit of that cheekiness. So you have to push the envelope a little bit. And I think that the head stomping thing, maybe it's on the edge of taste, but the way it's done as a joke and the humour, people kind of nervously laugh about it. And Sam Rockwell is brilliant around those scenes where he's talking about it. I think it skated just on the right side. There are a few other things in the movie as well. The whirly birds, it was something that Matthew was like, let's see if people will swallow this.
Literally.
Yeah. It's a crazy idea. He was wanting to see if people would go with it in a mischievous way. To start the movie with that right at the beginning, it's kind of like, it's making people think, what is this? Is this a spoof? The opening of the movie was quite a challenge, because it isn't, as if you've seen the movie, like that all the way through. It's supposed to wrong foot you straight away, but then it has to be fun and interesting enough for you to want to carry on watching. We were always discussing, like, are people going to think, wow, what is this? I don't want to watch it anymore. Or are they going to think, wow, what is this? This is crazy. Where is this going to go next? The challenge was getting through to Bryce Dallas Howard, how long we could stay in this kind of heightened world where crazy things like the whirlybird happen before we get to her. For the people who might think it's a bit too heightened for them, we had to compress things a little bit, but you couldn't take that much out. So I think the marketing was also very important in this regard, whether you knew what kind of film you were going to see. If you saw the fictional part at the beginning, knowing that wasn't what the whole film was about. For some people, they'd be like, when's Sam Rockwell in this? When's Bryce Dallas Howard in this? For other people, they wanted it to be like that all the way through. They wanted it to be the kind of Bond pastiche heightened movie. So it was quite a challenge in that regard of how long can you stay in one mode before you switch out of it. Wrong footing an audience is one thing, but kind of wrong footing them to the point that then they're switching off is the danger.
You both talked about the finale a little bit, And just to get there, the finale is so crazy. Basically, in the end, there's an elaborate escape sequence that is part shootout, part dance number, part slow motion smoke show. And if you don't level up the audience to that point, by the time you get there, they're like, what is this? This is not true to our movie anymore. This defies the visual language. It defies the tone. So is that something that you have to sort of pay attention to so that, like, hey, we have to earn our way to this kind of ending?
Yeah. Well, look, the smoke thing's from Matthew's mind. That's all I can say. It's a tricky one. I think we had a lot of discussions, between Tom and I when you first start seeing what was the intention for that scene as to, is this a dream sequence? Is this in their imagination? Is this them fantasizing so we're in a parallel reality? I have my thoughts on it, which is probably not correct for the way that it's supposed to be. It's just one of those scenes. It was something that, was always wanted and was executed.
Well, it's funnily enough, I think it was definitely left open for the longest time, whether this was in their minds, in the kind of the realization that her memories come back, they realize they love each other, that this is them kind of, they're dancing again finally after all this time. I mean, it's definitely heightened, but is it all in their minds? There was one shot that we had alts for. One of them kind of lets you know it is all in their minds, and one version didn't, which is there's a heat vision shot at the end that Bryan Cranston's character is seeing when they're doing the whirly bird where she's holding him up. We had them really doing the whirly bird, so what he's seeing on his heat vision is the whirly bird, and then we had the kind of real world thing that was happening, which was kind of like Mr. and Mrs. Smith style tactical dance fighting where they're leaning over each other and shooting, and that's what's in the movie. So I think that tells you what Matthew wanted you to think, which is he's seeing something that we weren't seeing throughout the whole rest of that sequence.
And I think from my point of view, that wasn't something that was successful. I don't think. I think it was too subtle a transition, because I don't think Tom just articulated the answer, but, I still didn't agree with it. But, that's the prerogative of an editor. We, as editors, cannot agree with everything that happens in a movie, but this is why we have editors, why we have directors, why we have producers, and why we have audiences. You put all your best ideas forward, but I think, as we say as editors, you try and win as many battles as you can, but, it's a very complicated film with a very strong-minded director, and that is to Matthew's credit. I support that you really do have to be strong-willed if you want a film that is your vision, and that's exactly what you want to get out of it. So, we all have to make adjustments.
Well, in terms of this tone thing that you're talking about, Matt, the movie is twisted so many times. It's gone this way, that way. It's kind of pulled the rug out so many times, up to the point where our character has a memory back. We've been fooled this way, fooled that way. And it gets to the point where it's like, now we're going to cut loose. We've got two super spies who love each other, and they're not going to take down the bad guys in a conventional way. We're going to go nuts. Which all the test screenings we had, gauging how people react to that, was very interesting, because some people think it's too silly, and they're like, it just went bonkers, and it stopped being real, so there wasn't any kind of real world threat anymore. And some people were just grinning ear to ear. They both all agree that it's silly or absurd or goofy, but they absolutely loved it because they'd never seen anything like that before, and it was taken to a version of itself that you wouldn't see with big actors and a big budget. You wouldn't see anything as nutty as that. So I think Matthew was fully aware that he was pushing it, and he wanted to see how far he could push it. We all know that there isn't any traditional action sequence, real threat, or any peril happening. So how are you still engaged in the sequence and what's happening? We went for a completely different idea. We just went for kind of visual and oral kind of craziness. And I can't remember the term that Matthew used for it, but he wanted it to build to a point where you think they can't get any more crazy than this.
Au contraire, because the next scene is a truly bizarre action sequence, if the one I just mentioned wasn't wild enough. And in this sequence, a character mounts knife blades to their boots so that they can ice skate through a large pool of oil while machine gunning the bad guys amidst a double axle here and a triple salchow there. It's a laugh and a lot of VFX, but Watching the end credits, you see references to ice skating coordinators and I believe a skating rink. So kind of a reminder that even when something is obviously visual effects heavy, it might not be totally built on visual effects. Is there more to that sequence than just a lot of CGI? Did you have to cut some actual ice skating footage first and then work that into the sequence?
Oh, yeah. Yes. They all did it for real. It was all done completely for real. This sequence was done originally with one kind of Olympic level skater. They made an amazing stunt viz for it. Then we actually couldn't get her. She had to go off to like Olympic trials for the actual shoot. So in the end, we had 4 different skaters doing it. Every single skate move you see in there was done for real. None of them are digi-doubles. It's just some face replacement and augmentation.
Before I let you guys go, because I know that you have a lot of work you're both doing right now, I actually had a question for you, Tom, and I didn't write it down, so I'm going to try and do this from memory. Something we discuss a lot is film school. Well, for you, you have been in the cutting rooms, whether assisting them directly or just around them, of editors, some of my favorite people and some of my most admired editors, Ann Coates, Kevin Tent, Eddie Hamilton, Rick Pearson, Matt Chassé, Conrad Buff, Pietro Scalia, Chris Rouse, Paul Matchless, and now, of course, Lee Smith. So I'm definitely putting you on the spot, as they say, but that's quite a murderer's row of talented people to be learning from. Anything in particular in your career that jumps out from working with any or all of them that you would want to pay forward to the listeners?
I definitely would say I learned from every single one of them in different ways. In some ways, how to handle yourself as like a head of department in all the big political films. In some, just in the pure way that they edit, all the different facets you need to be a feature film big editor. A lot of it is personality, confidence, and taste, and all the way through being an assistant. The only reason why I got into it is because I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to be. I wasn't interested in running the department or all that stuff. That just had to be something that you had to get good at if you wanted to progress. So we would constantly, on every single film I've ever worked on, talk about the story, talk about why things are working, why they're not working. And yeah, I learned from absolutely everywhere. I have recollections and anecdotes and stories from all of them. And I'm not going to single any of them out, but everybody's got a different approach, which is the really refreshing thing. There isn't some, if you're learning, I mean, I did go to film school as well ages ago, but I'd already worked on feature films. I was already a second assistant before I went to film school. And I came back out and went back to being a trainee again in features because I could have cut some TV straight out of film school. But in those days, TV and feature films was miles apart before streaming and everything. I knew what I wanted to do, so I went back into the world that I wanted to work in and just made sure that every movie I worked on, I got as much out of it creatively and sort of intellectually, talking to the editors I was assisting. They all kind of knew that that's where my interest was and helped feed it.
Lee, obviously I can't ask you what it's like working with Lee Smith, so I'll ask you, even after all of these projects you've done throughout your career, are you still learning new things? Is there anything, walking away from Argylle, anything new you learned about the craft or the business or yourself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, the recurring theme in my entire career is no 2 jobs are the same ever. It's, an incredibly rewarding experience because you learn so much on every film. You would think I would kind of by now be fairly confident that I'm not going to know anything else, but it's completely untrue. Every film throws up new challenges, and Argylle was certainly one that had its challenges, but that's great. That's what makes it exciting. And the last thing I'll say is it's great when you can work with a good crew, and I'm working with Pierce Roma, who I've worked with for years as my assistant helper, and then Tom got recommended by Eddie, and I'm very thankful for that because it's always nerve-wracking to have someone you've never actually met before on a big film. And Tom, other than his lack of height, worked out really well.
Well, luckily we worked remotely for a long time, so you didn't have to get offended by that.
But yeah, Tom was great, and Jan and the rest of the crew. It was a great experience, and really, the people are a huge part of the battle of making a film because it ain't easy, and anyone who says it is crazy. Every film is a challenge. but it's one I think we all relish, and we're excited for whatever the next challenge is.
Well, yeah, it is all about the people. And I guess the very last question I'll ask has nothing to do with people. And that is, what did that cat in the backpack look like prior to CGI? Was that just a stuffed animal or a picture of a cat's head?
That is a really weird thing that press has dreamt up. Almost every single shot of the cat in the movie is the real cat. Even if it wasn't in the bag, it's a plate of the cat in the bag. Just when he gets dropped off the building and when he attacks Bryan Cranston, they're the only times that it's CG.
Yeah.
So it's just an odd looking cat. It doesn't look like a normal cat. It's Matthew Vaughn's own cat, but it has kind of these big eyes. It makes it look quite cartoonish.
Yeah.
So people are pointing out shots, calling them CGI that are completely in camera real.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Good people and a weird looking cat. That's all you need. That was a real cat in that movie? Then again, if the ice skating was real, why not the cat? You want to know something else that was real? I had a real good time talking to Lee and Tom, and I hope they know how much I appreciate them coming on the show. Well, I guess I could just say it. Hey guys, I appreciate you coming on the show. Something else I would appreciate is you upping your game on Avid Media Composer, or getting a game on Avid Media Composer. Whether you've been using it for years or you've never even tried it, there are all kinds of new things for you to learn about transcriptions, AI features, interrupt with Pro Tools, and a bunch of other new great things. So click that link in the show notes and it will zip you on over to the Media Composer page on avid.com. Before we sign off today, I want to wish a best of luck to all the editors nominated for Ace Eddie Awards this coming Sunday. I will be there with my avid partner in crime, Michael Krulik, and we will do our best to capture the proceedings, dare I say the magic, for you on social media. It should be a great time, and if you are in LA this weekend, I hope to see you there. As for the rest of you, I hope to see you back here again next week. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.